Hello and welcome to another Small Gold live stream. Today we're going to talk about why is Russia continuing to add gold to reserves, and we've got some charts showing the prodigious amounts of gold that Russia has been buying and adding to reserves. But to start off, we thought we'd have our superstar panel of Bernie, Mario, and Seamus give us their thoughts. So we've got them here in studio and we thought we'd ask them, why is Russia adding so much gold to reserves? We'll kick it off with you, Bernie. Why do you think this is?
Well, you see, Russia used to be a great country when it was run and it was part of the Soviet Union. I went there on my honeymoon and there wasn't any talk of gold. Now they're all gold crazy. They're obsessed with the gold. And they don't realize that everything should be free and there's no reason why they shouldn't give that gold to everyone.
Mario, what do you think?
Well, this is a matter of the fiscal policy, because the monetary policy cannot print the money in Russia because they have a problem, because no one wants the ruble. The ruble is not something that you can print and people are going to accept. So it makes sense from a fiscal and monetary policy standpoint that they take the gold.
Seamus?
Well, you're all fucking crazy. What are you talking about, printed money? First of all, gold is precious. It's a precious metal. If you don't understand that, then you don't understand anything about finance or economics. Leprechauns know full well gold is money, period. And that's why the Russians are stacking and storing it, you all crazy fools.
All right. Well, I think we've got some understanding. Vote if you will. Who made the most sense? Was it Bernie? Was it Mario, or was it our friend Seamus? All right, let's get into what we got on this whole Russian buying of gold and stacking it and so on, and find out what they're doing, why they're doing it. And our first chart just shows the massive amounts of gold that Russia has been buying since we've been tracking it, I would say since going back 5 years. We have added, or Russia has added, about 1,000 tons of gold. A prodigious amount. Here you can see, going back to 2015, they had 1,281 tons, and now they're all the way up to 2,230 tons. And let's show you how that's been accomplished over time. Here we go. So some months they will add over 1 million ounces of gold. They will add 1.1 million, 1.3 million. Last month in August, they added 400,000 ounces. So quite a bit of gold being poured into the central bank coffers of the Bank of the Russian Federation. Now, let's look at when this all started. And it started around the time of the financial crisis. Russia, like other countries in the 90s, early 2000s, was largely a buyer and seller, and mostly a seller, as you can see towards the turn of the century. And this ties into the concept of the gold agreements, the central bank gold agreements. Now, Russia was not a signatory to them. Those are central banks in the Western world who agreed 3 times to have it, which finally expired this year, these agreements amongst themselves not to sell certain amounts of gold. And the rationale for it was, ever since Bretton Woods in 1971, central banks in general had been dishoarding their gold in favor of the whole fiat currency system. And the concept behind the central bank agreements, if you go way, way back, before they even had these agreements, if you remember, well, you won't remember, but you may recall from what we've discussed that Nixon, when he took the world off the gold standard unilaterally, the Bretton Woods gold standard, or the dollar gold standard, whereby the central banks that had signed up for the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944 were told that they could exchange their dollars that they accumulate at the U.S. Treasury, bring the dollars in, and get gold at $35 an ounce. When Nixon said, we're not going to do that anymore, a lot of the European countries thought to themselves, well, we're going to still hold on to gold. And a lot of commentators thought that gold would just become a trinket. It would not be part of the monetary or financial system. They were wrong. It's still part of the financial system to the extent that it is a reserve, and it has stood in countries' balance sheets as reserves since 1971. And there was some concern that they wanted the U.S. to go back to the old Bretton Woods standard, but they never did, as you know, even though Nixon said he temporarily suspended that gold window where the central banks could bring their gold. And so what happened since 1971 all the way through the 90s, where central banks were pretty much lightening their loads with gold. Russia was no exception. Switzerland dropped their gold in the early 2000s in order to join the IMF from well over 2,000 tons down to 1,040. England, the United Kingdom, sold over half of their gold in the early 2001 or 2, I think. And a lot of countries did that, and they shed their gold. And only recently have they started to add back some of the gold. It started about 5 years ago when Germany set off a repatriation request stampede. A lot of the gold held by the Western central banks, where the bulk of the gold is held, and we'll show you a chart on that, had their gold at the New York Fed. A good portion of it the New York Fed, some of it at the Bank of England, some at the Bank of France, but mostly at the New York Fed for safekeeping. Was done after World War II. It makes sense. They were concerned about Bernie's buddies at the Soviet Union rolling across Western Europe and taking it over and taking the gold along the way. So Germany asked for the gold about 4 or 5 years ago as a repatriation request. Holland did the same. There were a bunch of countries, Austria, Belgium, either considered it or did it. And then we started to see in the last 18 months, countries other than Russia starting to add gold, other than Russia and China. Really Russia, China, and then Kazakhstan for the last 5 years were the only countries that were significantly adding gold. The rest were either dishoarding it or just not buying it at all. And Russia was no different. If you're looking at the chart now, we're seeing in the early 2000s, Russia wasn't adding gold. In fact, from 1998 to 2002, they net sold gold. And really, through 2006, they only had 1 year where they added gold, but there were a number of years where they actually sold off the gold. The gold buying at the Soviet Union began in earnest around 2007, 2008. You can see with the financial crisis, reached its peak last year at 271 tons. And as a result of all this gold buying that you see on the chart there from the Soviet Union or Russia, they have vaulted themselves into the top 10 and actually passed China. Now, when we say these countries, note the title of the chart, gold reserves by central bank, not by country. Talking about how much gold is in a country, that includes what's held by citizens, sovereign wealth funds, other banks, and temples like in India. But these numbers are just the central bank numbers. And of course, we can't prove any of these numbers. What I find interesting and amusing about gold bugs is they insist that the U.S. numbers can't be trusted, that somehow the United States doesn't have the gold that it says it has, but somehow the rest of these numbers are all correct, and that China's are understated because it's some type of Sun Tzu deception. It's all nonsense. First of all, none of them can be trusted. But my point on all of this is if any country is going to have gold, has the capability to have gold, has the mining production, has the military, has the history of gold, has the printing press to print it up to buy it, it would be the United States. So this idea that people scoff at, and it's become almost common misknowledge, that the United States has no gold and China's got more gold than anyone on earth, and one day they're going to roll it out to a stadium, it's going to be game over, game changer, and all this other nonsense we've been hearing about. De-dollarization, multipolar world, end of dollar hegemony, dollar collapse, and so on. It's all nonsense. I can't prove that any of these countries have the gold that they say they have. There's no audit. There's no way of verifying it. But I will say that if it was important to have gold, it was essential to national security to have gold. It was essential to the functioning of the financial system to have gold. There's one country on earth that would have it. It would be the United States. To believe otherwise is just nonsense. Okay, but there it is. So what we see is Russia has now 2,230 tons, and since they've added that gold, they've burst into the top 10, the central bank of Russia. And the thing about Russia is they have, let me show you, significant gold mining production. And because of that, That's one of the main reasons they're adding gold, is because they can. And there you go. They mine over recently 300 tons of gold a year, and more recently they are putting a greater percentage of those gold reserves, of those gold mining, of that gold mining production into their reserves. Last 3 years, over 80%, 2016, 17, and 18. And the little bit extra that they have, they've been shipping to China, and then just starting in 2019, they started shipping some of this gold over to India, who has a voracious demand. Now, speaking of India, what do you think, Seamus? Should we talk about India? Of course we should. All right, let's take a look at India. And there you are. India is such a voracious buyer of gold. It dwarfs the amount that Russia adds, and Russia does add a large amount. This just shows since 2014, 15, 16, and 17 that Russia has added over 1,000 tons, but India, almost 4,000 tons have been imported. So while Russia is adding a lot of gold, India remains the big buyer of gold other than China. Now, when I say China, the Central Bank of China, the People's Bank of China, has purchased less gold than the Central Bank of Russia. That doesn't mean they're lying and Sun Tzu says, oh, no. It means that the Chinese, as a matter of policy, they're trying to deceive anyone. I don't think anyone really cares that much, has put their gold in the People's Bank of China, and that's what they report. It's not to say that China doesn't have other gold. In fact, I had an article published in Zero Hedge where I had a quote from one of the governors of the People's Bank of China. It says, a lot of the country's gold is outside of the People's Bank of China. They're not trying to deceive anybody about this. Everyone knows they have gold. There are production numbers that come out of China that show they've produced 2 times more gold in the last... They've produced 5,000 tons of gold in the last 20 years. They only have less than 2,000 tons of gold on their balance sheet at the People's Bank of China. So, of course, there's more gold in China. It's just not at the People's Bank of China. As I mentioned, that People's Bank of China governor said that it's at other sovereign wealth funds, it's at other subsidiary banks of the People's Bank of China that doesn't get rolled up into their balance sheet, and it's at other state-owned banks and also wealthy individuals. In fact, there was this story yesterday. I'll show you guys tonight, or maybe I'll show it to you on Solid Gold Sunday. Some Chinese guy, I don't know, he's somehow connected with the government. 13 tons of gold they found them with. Now, somehow he wasn't supposed to have this. I don't know how you end up with 13 tons of gold. I mean, 13 tons of anything. You really need a large... They showed this picture of it sprawled out on the floor. In any event, point is, of course, there's a lot of gold in China. It's just not at the People's Bank of China. And the Russian Central Bank is actually being more diligent in adding it. And that's because the Russian have a much less complicated balance sheet. They're not reliant on borrowing and consumer spending and exports the way China is. So China has a much larger balance sheet, a much larger economy. They've got $4 trillion in foreign reserves, reduced down to $3 trillion in the last couple of years. Their finances are so opaque. So who knows how much gold is in the country? I estimate 25,000 tons. But Russia, I think, is pretty transparent. We know what they do. They export a lot of oil and some grain, and they've got some decent gold mining, and the amounts that they say they're adding make sense given how much they mine. But let's take a look at the top. Did I show you the top? No, let's look here. Yeah, I did show you the top. We'll show it to you again there. But you can see where Russia is. Now, France and Italy and Germany are all in the top 5, but they haven't added gold for years. Decades. Germany, in fact, has been selling 4 or 5 tons of gold a year. Another article I had published in Zero Hedge showing that they sell gold to their government mint, to mint gold coins. Now, Germans themselves, just like the Chinese, just like the Turks, the citizens buy a tremendous amount of gold. The Germans, especially since 2008, 2009. Individuals buying gold. So these numbers are central bank numbers. They're not the amount of gold in the country. I think the other day I showed where Germany, India, and China, those 3 countries, forget the central banks, but the peoples in those countries own about 1/3 of the world's gold. They're very big buyers of gold. And so what you're seeing here, are central bank numbers. Now, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they're very interesting because they're in the top 20. I would say the bulk of the gold in those countries is held at the central bank. And the reason I say that is those countries do not have a lot of people. The people themselves do not have a lot of wealth at the moment. And they're big gold mining countries, so that gold ends up at the central bank. That makes sense. But you'll see that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan will probably enter the top 10 in the next 3 to 5 years if the Western central banks don't add any more gold or they just add some and they don't add that much. But it's interesting. It used to be that the countries, and it still kind of is, United States, Germany, Italy, France, Russia, China, Switzerland, Japan, India, they're the big economies of the world. But when you start seeing Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan moving up the charts there, it's kind of interesting. But now Lebanon has a lot. I'm not quite sure why they have a lot, but they have more than Spain. Austria has a decent amount. Saudi Arabia, you would expect to have more. Now, I would expect, or I would guess, that the people who run Saudi Arabia probably have more than 323 tons. It's the same thing as China. They're not lying. It's just that the central bank of Saudi Arabia, it doesn't have the nation's gold. So I would bet there's tremendous amounts of gold wealth owned by Saudi Arabians, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or they're holding it in Swiss vaults or wherever. All right, let's get back and see if there's anything else on Russia we want to talk about. If not, we'll let you go. We'll be back again tonight. Remember, we do a live show every evening on YouTube if the stream works. Then we publish on BitChute and Smaulgld. The Smaulgld patrons and Subscribe Star gets published over there. I do appreciate those who are monthly subscribers on Subscribe Star and Patreon, and those of you who donate via PayPal or send donations via snail mail. We'll give you that number, that P.O. box in just a minute. And let's see if there's anything else. I think we've seen all of the charts. Yes, we have. All right. So, again, as I was mentioning about the channel, we also do a full, usually about an hour's worth of just silver presentation and discussion every Saturday night. It's called Saturday Night Silver with Smaulgld. So please join us for that. Subscribe to the channel for that. And then on Sunday, we do Solid Gold Sunday with Smaulgld, where we discuss just a gold topic. And there are interactive discussions after we do the presentation. And sometimes Bernie or Mario or Seamus or some other character will join us. So please sign up for that. And we will see you tonight. Smaulgld Mug Stackers and Game Changers.